I was in litigation, and Ben Thomas, that became my partner, he was a partner in the firm that I worked for, and he was going on vacation to Egypt, and he was going to have to just they weren't going to do closings for a couple weeks. And I was like, I mean, like, do I know how to do closings? No, but I could probably learn enough to make it so you don't have to do 0 closings during that time. And he took that to mean we're wide open. So I just had to dive right in.
You know what the answer is, or you know what the issue is. But if you don't have somebody to talk it through with, you're just frazzled and you can't move forward. Don't spend, an hour, 2 hours trying to find a statute when one of us may know it off the top of our head because somebody just asked us about the same one.
I am so excited for this episode of The Real Estate Show. I am joined by Christy Moretz-Eicher. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
With Investors Title. Tell me, well, I know what you do, but for our real estate agents and real estate people listening, tell me a little bit about what you do at Investors Title.
So at Investors, we have 7 North Carolina title attorneys. I'm one of the 7 title attorneys. We answer questions for all of our North Carolina approved attorneys, as well as our branch offices and our agency offices. And so we get emails and phone calls all day long. When
a lot
I'm
of
not
them from
out,
Thomas and Weber.
Always good ones. When I'm not in the office answering questions, then we go out and we go to offices, do lunch and learns, just try to keep everybody informed of the newest things going on in the industry. But mostly it's all day, every day answering title questions.
Yeah, which, to be an attorney, you have to be at least a little bit nerdy. So it's interesting, but it's also probably exhausting.
It is very exhausting because you don't realize how many different fields of law intersect in real property transactions. You could have bankruptcy, divorce, estates, all of it converging in one file. And so you have to keep all of that plus all the real estate stuff. Yeah. And it's just a lot to keep on your mind, especially with statutes and changes and legislation and new cases. So you have to be a little bit nerdy to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have some of our attorneys that are involved with AOC and the legislature, so they keep us informed on what's going on.
That's nice.
So we can focus more on the questions and less on what's happening right now.
So I have to ask a favor. If we start asking you dumb questions, will you please tell me?
Oh, there are no dumb questions. And I will say,
come on.
I will say there really aren't, because things change so frequently, right? I feel like there are statutory changes, there's date changes and stuff. So there's no dumb questions. And I feel like sometimes it's those questions that help us get to the even more important questions that maybe somebody wasn't thinking about when they asked the original questions. So
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. There have definitely been times where I've had a question for title counsel, and it's one thing that I've ruminated over so long, or I've turned it over in my mind so many different ways. And I get to a point where I'm like, it can't be that simple, can it? And I know I'm overlooking something. So whenever I have that thought, I'm like, I got to go to the title company because I got to get somebody smarter than me on the line to see what I'm missing here. And it's helped almost every single time. There's been one time where I got a response and they were like, no, you're just overthinking it. But usually they're like, you know what? Yeah, that's, I think that pointing something out to me, that I'm like, I know I'm missing something and I don't know what it is. Now,
and I will say, probably somebody else asked that same question earlier, right? Because we get a lot of repeat questions, and it's ones like that where you know the answer, but you're like, okay, there's something off on this one, right? And that happens to us too. There's 7 of us, and sometimes we'll shoot an email out to the group and just be like, hey, I should know this answer and this is what it is, but I need somebody to tell me I'm right today, right? Yes. Everybody has those days.
Yes. Now, I love that you, before you were at Investors, were in private practice. Can you talk a little bit about your journey from real estate lawyer to deciding to go, I know the term isn't really in-house, but to go to work for a company that's not doing closings all day?
Right. So I graduated and passed the bar in 2008 when there was a HUD, right? Things have changed a lot since then, but I started my practice in Hickory. And I literally got thrown into a closing room one day. The partner was like, I'm leaving for vacation. You got it. And I'd never seen those packages before because I was renting at the time. I was fresh out of law school. And so I just sort of fell into real estate. It wasn't something that I necessarily was trying to do, but I like it because it's a puzzle sort of sometimes, especially the title work. So I started that, eventually took over the real estate practice, and I was doing everything. I was doing the payoff ordering, the title searches, the document prep, the post-closing. This was before e-recording. So I was going to the offices, doing the updates.
You're being your courier too.
Yes. So I did everything from start to finish. And it was very time consuming if you had multiple counties that you were trying to close. So I would have my route ready to go and then get back to the office.
Pray there's no traffic.
Right. And so Hickory was a definitely different experience because it was very hands-on. I did everything myself until I had enough volume that I could have my own paralegal do everything, or well, not everything, but all the things that would help me get the actual legal work done a little bit more efficiently. And so that was a very different experience than when I joined a Charlotte firm, because at the Charlotte firm, everything was compartmentalized. You had post-closing, you had pre-closing, you had closing attorneys, you had title attorneys. And so I started out in our Cornelius office and I was doing everything, closings, title work, all that. I had my son. And when I came back, I wasn't ready to go back to the Cornelius office. So I asked if I could work from home. And really what you can do from home is title. So I started doing just title, and it ended up being, I just got it. I was able to explain it to all of our associates and help them understand. And I eventually just became the managing title attorney and did all things title. So whenever something would come up in our office, they would come to me. And then if I didn't know the answer, I would call the title insurance company. And so I got really familiar with all the title companies and all their counsel because I was calling them on a daily basis. It felt like we at my firm, we did stuff all across the state. And so there were issues popping up on the coast that I was not familiar with at all. And so I learned so much in that role as managing title attorney. I mean, I brought a lot of knowledge with me, but I learned so much. And really, it was my connection with the title attorneys that I talked to that eventually they asked one day, you know, would you ever think about doing this? And
because they're like, you ask the best questions.
Right. Or
you give us the good stuff.
Or they're like, we really don't want to have to mess with your problems anymore. Please come join us so we can eliminate those. Thank you.
And then they can call you.
Right. And so it was very different going from being the attorney that puts, you know, per so-and-so title company, we're okay, to now my name's going to be in somebody's file saying, Christy Eichert said, this is okay.
Yeah,
and
we've
so
got a couple files like that.
Right? I know. Erica has sent me some. And I'm like, you can just put my name down. We're good.
Yeah.
But yes, so that was sort of the transition. Also, I joined Investors last year in July. I had practice during the whole COVID craziness. I sort of burnt myself out a little bit of that because it was constant. You know, we were viewing title on the weekend. We were trying to get stuff done efficiently. You know, we had a team of 6 or 7 at the time, and there was just so much to do.
The volume was insane.
And you took it home. It wasn't like you were done. You know, you had files that follow you for months and months. And so when that became an option, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to be 40. And I've got an 8-year-old and I've been working like crazy. I really like title. Let's see if this works out. And so far, so good.
Yeah,
you know, there are still
working
some
out
files.
for us.
There are still some files that follow me home that I would rather not. You guys still have some that I stay with. You know, you get one phone call one month and then the next month there's new information and you're like, oh gosh, what was that file?
Yeah, you got to re-familiarize yourself all over again.
But it's different though, because I usually answer a question and then move on to the next one. So it's similar in my role in private practice from the title part, but it's also different because it's questions all over the state and just like bam, bam, bam. Sometimes you get an email every 5 minutes and you're trying to keep up. And we like to try to respond within 30 minutes if possible, because I know with you guys, sometimes you need an immediate answer. I get a lot of calls and they're like, we're at the closing table. And those are stressful because you're like, okay, let's figure out how to make this work and be done with it. And everybody's good.
And then, you know, the closing attorney having been in that situation,
it's
to have something come up at the closing table, you're like, what?
Yes. And I think too, when you're in private practice and you're a solo or you're the only one that does real estate, the title company for me was like a phone a friend. You know, in Hickory, I would call them because I didn't have anybody else in my office that did that. They did divorce, criminal, personal injury. There was nobody I could talk to. And so that was a different experience. And it made me learn that, hey, the title company is here to help you.
Yes.
They're knowledgeable. We never think it's a dumb question. We would rather you ask than just assume and do it wrong and then have to try to correct it after. So I got really comfortable with the title company when it was just me doing the real estate. And then when I joined the firm and there were so many people, I still had people to talk to, but then there were questions that we were like, I've never seen this before, you know?
Yeah, which is wild. And that we'll always have stuff that we've never seen before.
Always.
You know, you were mentioning how you kind of got trial by fire with real estate because the partner said, I'm going on vacation. I don't know if I ever told you this, but that happened to me too. I was in litigation and the Ben Thomas that became my partner, he was a partner in the firm that I worked for, and he was going on vacation to Egypt, and he was going to have to just not, I mean, they weren't going to do closings for a couple weeks. And I was like, I mean, like, no, do I know how to do closings? No, but I could probably learn enough to make it so you don't have to do 0 closings during that time. And he took that to mean we're wide open. So I just had to dive right in. And I remember taking a loan package to, at that time, I think I took it to Define Coffee in Huntersville, and I'd taken an old redacted loan package, and I went through every single document, and I figured out a way, like, okay, if I had to explain this in 2 sentences to a first-time home buyer, what would I say? And, you know, I still have that notebook, but it made me think of that, of like, that's the experience of so many of us of, there's not a ton of training.
No.
Now, I did have the benefit, though, of when Ben came back, he had been doing this so long that, like, he was my built-in go-to.
Right. You had a mentor right there.
Right there. And he taught me everything that he could possibly teach me in the time that we had together. But when he passed away, I very quickly learned the value of calling the title companies, because for me, my first stop would be Ben.
Right.
And when he's no longer there, I was like, well, who do I ask? I've got to ask. I mean, I got to be able to ask somebody.
And it makes a difference, because sometimes just talking it through, you know what the answer is, or you know what the issue is. But if you don't have somebody to talk it through with, you're just frazzled and you can't move forward. So to me, that's just call, just email. Don't spend, you know, an hour, 2 hours trying to find a statute when one of us may know it off the top of our head because somebody just asked us about the same one.
And then there's also the fact that you guys have been in private practice and you have done closings. Sometimes there's difficult information to relay. Like, I remember I had one time someone was flat out asking me to do something that was mortgage fraud. And I was refusing, of course. And I called up one of the title companies that, like, someone I had been trying to be a mentor in the place of Ben after he passed away. And I'm like, at what point can I just be like, go kick rocks? And he's like, you're past that point. You can do that now. You've tried to be nice. You've done all you can. You're right. And I was like, am I missing something? Because to me, this seems pretty obviously illegal. He's like, it is obviously illegal. And you can send them on their merry way and, you know, report whatever you got to report. And it was just kind of nice in that situation. And even though most of the people that listen to this are real estate agents, I want to bring this up because the title counsel at the title companies are kind of like the unknown important piece of the puzzle in getting title issues resolved, especially when it's like the tricky, sticky stuff. You know, we've seen some crazy stuff and we're able to resolve a lot of stuff right here at the office and can get that cleaned up. But whenever it's wild, then the agents might not even realize there's like a whole other attorney working on this that you don't even know, you know, and they're not charging you by the hour.
Right.
You know,
I
it's like a benefit to everybody involved of, you know, having the title insurance company in the transaction, because you've got these like incredibly experienced attorneys providing their knowledge and value to get your client to the closing table. So I like bringing this up for the agents just so they're like, oh, okay, we do. There's more people in our corner than we realized.
And, you know, our goal is to help you guys close, right? Because from a business perspective, we don't get a premium if there's no closing. And so I think sometimes people think that we're just trying to make their lives difficult, but really we're trying to come up with creative solutions to get everybody closed, but also protect you, them, the buyers. You know, we want to make sure that we're doing something that we feel is low risk. And that's another thing with the title, is that it's not necessarily what's legally right? From the title insurance, it's a gray area. It's risk. It's weighing risk. Maybe something was done wrong, but the risk is so low and it's so old that we're going to insure over it. Maybe it was done exactly right, but somebody's threatening litigation and we don't want to buy a lawsuit. And so it really is different than being in private practice, because we're looking at it from a risk perspective and we're trying to come up with creative ways.
And that gives you flexibility that we don't have.
Yes. And that's why it's good for you guys to call us, because you don't have to make that call. You don't have to say, okay, I'm going to weigh this risk and do this. You can say, so-and-so said this was okay, so that if something comes up later, you've got a policy in place and you've got us that are going to eventually defend that claim because we thought it would be low risk and we agreed to insure it. So I do think that the title company is a very important component component of the closing process. Obviously, being a title attorney myself, I think title is the most important piece of the closing process. But
I say it's the foundation of everything we do. If we're not good at title, then we might as well just not have a real estate law firm.
I agree 100%. To me, I think title's what nobody can see, right? And to me, it's the very most important.
Like the bulk of what, like if I think about what we're charging for, it's to make sure that's right.
Yeah, it's the most time consuming, right? I mean, you want to make sure that your buyer is getting good title and they don't have an issue after closing.
Yeah,
and
they're not paying for that dog and pony show at the closing table.
No,
that's not the value we provide.
And their note and their deed of trust is going to be their note and their deed of trust. It's a standard form for most, in most cases. And the title is just so unique to each piece of property, and one fact can change things. So I think you have to be very cognizant and very tedious that is to try to make sure you're not missing one little piece of the puzzle there.
I think agents and buyers, especially because all of this work is going on behind the scenes, we might see something like an unsatisfied deed of trust, and we get that cleaned up before you guys ever, before an agent or buyer even knows about it. Like it doesn't mean that because you're not hearing about title, there's not work being done to make it good.
Right.
It's just, we're not going to bother you with it unless it's going to impact your closing in some way.
It's behind the scenes until it's imperative that it could cause a delay or you're going to need some additional information from the client, right?
The last thing we need is a first-time home buyer who's already got their parents come into every inspection and, looking over their shoulder at everything, and they're already stressed to be told there's an unsatisfied deed of trust.
Right.
And we can get that done in sometimes just days. Right. You never even have to worry.
And then some of them are so close to statutory expiration too. That's when the title company may come in and say, okay, we'll insure over with the Alta 34 identified risk. We're going to take exception and say, yes, there's this outstanding deed of trust, but we feel pretty good that it's probably been paid in full and that in a year it's going to be expired per statute. So we're going to say we'll insure against any loss or damages that you would incur as a result of somebody trying to enforce that deed of trust after the fact. And I would say that the Alta 34 comes in handy for a lot of prior owner deed of trust. Obviously, we want them to be canceled if they can be. We want statutory expiration to get here as quick as possible, but sometimes you just can't. And sometimes the mortgage company is no longer in existence. It's 4 owners back, and there's been multiple subsequent deeds of trust, purchase money deeds of trust. To me, that's low risk there. Now, if it's $1 million, my analysis may change, but $50,000, $100,000 one. So I think that's a lot of what goes into the title work is identifying the problems, seeing if you can fix them before you have to involve the agents or the clients so as not to panic everybody, because there are a lot of ways to fix things that don't require, much more than calling the title company.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioning the Alta 34 right before we started recording, you were telling me about this wild scenario you had. Because I know agents get asked, especially for vacant lots, they want to combine it and build a house on it. And great, awesome. But you were telling me something that I hadn't thought of, but makes perfect sense. So will you tell our audience?
We just had one recently where an individual had purchased 2 side-by-side vacant lots, combined them, built their house right in the middle, and didn't think that each lot line was subject to a drainage easement. And so their house is literally sitting right on the drainage easements, runs right through the middle there. And nobody really thought about it at the time until they go to resell. And then somebody looks at the plat, somebody looks where the house is, and they're like, what do we do now?
Yeah.
And so in that case, we ended up feeling comfortable enough to do an Alta 34. And what we did is we took exception to the drainage easement as shown on the plat. But we gave them Alta 34 coverage after they did research in the restrictive covenants. They talked to the zoning, I think it was county zoning administration, to make sure that nobody needed a drainage easement there, that there wasn't a adjoining lot that needed a drainage easement, that there wasn't something in the restrictive covenants that would make us feel uncomfortable doing it. And basically, we decided that, hey, we'll take exception to the drainage easement, but we're going to give you an Alta 34, which says it protects you against any loss or damage, and that's actual loss or damage that you would incur as a result of a final court order or decree enforcing that in favor of an adverse party, essentially. So if somebody comes in and says, lot 16 behind you has to have this drainage easement, your house has to be moved. And really, I don't think that's going to happen in a court, right? When you're thinking of what is equitable versus not. There's got to be another way probably to get a drainage easement situation. So we were thinking risk wise, it's low enough for us to give you some coverage over that so that the buyer felt comfortable purchasing houses, especially with housing prices these days, right? You're putting out a lot of money for that. And
you don't want it to have to be torn down.
Right. And so that's how we handled that one. And it was a very interesting one because it's not something I had answered before. But like you said, when you look at it, you're like, okay, a lot of subdivisions reserve easements along all the lot lines and utility easements, not so much. But the drainage easement could potentially be an issue. So that was a very interesting one that we had pop up.
I feel like we see it in the reverse more often where lots are subdivided and easements are needed to be created, but not. And with septic especially.
Yes.
You know, somebody builds their house on the family land and they've got their septic and then they subdivide it and the septic lines cross over into the vacant parcel.
Yes. And I would say easements and access are probably one of the more common questions that I get, especially now when there's not very much land to be developed. And so when there is this large vacant tract, you've got a developer or builder wanting to come in and buy it, subdivide it, sell it out. And whoops, when whoever owned it before sold the 20-acre tract and kept the 50-acre tract, they didn't reserve an easement to themselves. And now a lot of times what we see is that part of the road state maintained, but there's a portion that's still private. And it's what connects to this acreage that the builder wants to build on. And I think I've had that come up 4 or 5 times in the last couple months because there's no houses for sale on the market compared to what the need is right now. So people are thinking, okay, let's build and sell new construction, new lots.
And they're finding land that maybe wouldn't have been.
Right.
My theory on the way the market is going right now is that a lot of the sellers that are selling are doing so because they need to, not necessarily because they want to. So the transactions are getting more difficult. So that could be, all right, we got access issues, but we got to sell this land. So somebody will figure it out.
And so with that, usually what we say is, okay, all of this is state maintained, but the 100 feet that connects to the state maintenance and your 50-acre tract is private. You've got to figure out who the developer was, who owns the underlying fee and get an easement for them. And a lot of times they've passed, right? So then you're looking at estates, you're looking at heirs, you're looking at judgments against those individuals. So it can be really tedious. And that's a big thing is that if there's no grant or reservation of easement when all of this is happening, 50 years ago, the people that are now purchasing it are like, great, now we have to deal with this. And the parties are no longer here. So that is a big one that we're seeing.
We had a weird one like that. Well, it wasn't for a developer, but, no, it was. The right of way was never properly dedicated and there wasn't any sort of reservation of it. And through the estate, the person had left that interest to a church, but specifically the national organization. Trying to track down the national organization to see if they would give up their interest.
And churches are so interesting too because it's very specific, right? If it's Methodist, if it's Baptist, if it's Catholic,
if
there's
it's
all
Southern
different
Baptist.
Yes. And we've actually had a lot of church questions as well too. And I think that's just the nature of what we're seeing right now is the church is like, okay, well, we could actually make some money selling this that could help our congregation. Let's go ahead and do it. And so I think there was one week that I got Catholic, Methodist, Baptist questions all on the same day. And I felt like
they're all different.
And it's so different, different.
And then the unincorporated churches.
Oh, yes. Those are so lovely. You've got the trustees, and then sometimes they incorporate after the fact, but they never convey title from the trustees to the corporation. So you're like, we're going to need both to sign now.
Yes. And anytime we get a new file in that has a church, I just call up the agent and say, hey, just so you know, probably going to be a little bit of a wild ride here, especially if it is for whatever reason, like the smaller churches. They just they don't have the paperwork.
No, the independent Baptist churches, they just do things. That's how they've always done it. They may not even have bylaws or anything like that. And so you're like, okay, call a congregation meeting,
The number of times I have heard people say that are selling church property say, well, we prayed about it. That's enough. I mean, that's like a legitimate thing. And I'm like,
man.
I'm glad.
Yes.
But we do have to can you write down?
Can we get that reflected in some minutes signed by your church secretary or treasurer? That would be very helpful.
Yes. Even if you just write down the prayer, like,
right? Yes.
Give us something.
And it's crazy the stuff that we're seeing right now too, because I think the churches, the access, tax foreclosures, I'm getting questions about those on the regular. And I had not had previously. I think when I was in private practice, I maybe had 2 come across my desk, within the, I don't know, when I was in Charlotte, I think probably there was more than that. But in Hickory, I think I had 2 maybe the whole time I was in Hickory. And now here we get them multiple per week questions on those.
Thankfully don't have a bunch of those, that at least not involved in closings, when we'll get requested to do title searches for people that want to bid on them.
Yep.
And you see some wild stuff.
It is. And I would say for anybody that is listening that is thinking about bidding on a tax foreclosure, personal service is the biggest thing, right? There are a lot of title companies that just won't insure them or won't insure them for the year where you have the year contest period. For us, personal service, if there's not personal service on all owners and all lien holders that would be adversely affected, we're probably going to say no. Once you get to 7 or 10 years past the tax foreclosure, we feel a lot better about it. But we've got ones that are, they're bidding at the sale, or they just purchased it and now they're trying to sell it to a new buyer. And there was personal service issues. And I will say,
you find out a creditor, it was not.
Right.
Like,
and a lot of times there's heirs involved, right? So you get a guardian ad litem appointed, which is great, but you still have to serve the known heirs, right? If there's an estate file that says so-and-so and so-and-so are the known heirs and you don't serve them. We had one like that. And we basically said, if you can get quitclaim deeds from those known heirs that were not personally served, that will fix it. And so I think that's just something to be cognizant out there, because I know there are a lot of people out there.
And the likelihood of those heirs being happy about this?
Right. Not. You're probably going to have to pay out a little bit of money to get their signature.
Or they're like, oh, great, I've got an interest in this property that doesn't owe back taxes anymore. I think I'll keep it.
Right. And especially if you're still within that 1-year contest period, right? That's very concerning. So anytime you're bidding at the courthouse steps, right, it's a little... it makes me nervous, but the personal service is the biggest issue for the tax foreclosures, I think, that we're seeing.
I'm thankful that we don't have to deal with that very often. But now the next time we do, I'm going to just call you.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, can we talk a little bit about wire fraud? And we preach about this as often as we can because it's not going anywhere. I actually just got the newsletter from investors recently about how the scams ramp up around the holidays.
Yes,
and I think this will probably come out next. I think it's going to come out in a couple days from now. So right before Christmas. And, it's so busy around the holidays. Everybody's rushing around trying to get stuff done before Christmas and, wrap things up. So they might let their guard down a little bit, and the scammers know that, and they're just ready to strike. So one thing that you guys have share around with different closing attorneys' offices is the wire form, the what I require every time. So we follow that policy as well of the information that we've got to have on hand. We require in-person verified instructions, whether they're, a notary and sent to us that we call and verify, or they do it with us in office. But if you'll just talk to us a little bit about what you've seen and, ways that we can try to stay vigilant on wire fraud.
Yeah, I would say the main thing is just don't rely necessarily on anything that you're getting via email, right? Because one of the things that we see the most that we've had claims on is that maybe an agent's email gets spoofed. It's a period in there that you don't pay attention to and you don't notice it. And the fraudster knows all about the transaction. They know all the details. They shoot that email with wiring instructions, and it looks like the email that it should, because in your mind, you're dealing with 50,000 things in a day and you miss that one little period on there.
Or an L versus a 1.
Yes. And so the emails, just be so cognizant of those emails and making sure that it's not off by a letter or a character or whatever it is.
And sometimes they'll put the correct name, but then if you actually look at the email address, it's not even
if you
close.
hover over the link to see it come up, you'll say, okay, that's not actually the email that's supposed to be sending us that. So I think that's a big one, is that we have had several where they've sent funds to the wrong wiring instructions because it came from an email that they recognized because it looked like it was, and
but not
they had just
completely accurate.
stopped and looked at the whole thing, then they would have noticed it was just one character off there.
And then the next layer of that is don't send a wire without calling.
Exactly. I think too, a lot of firms there for a while were just like, we're not sending wires. We're so afraid we're just not sending wires. But in today's market, it's really difficult. Hard to do. And especially if you've got...
Trust me, if I didn't think it would be detrimental to the people that are relying on the funds coming to them quickly, I wouldn't want to do it.
And I know a lot of people are using a service called Certified to verify wiring instructions. That's great. I hear that it's a little pricey. So for smaller firms, it may not be practical for them. And so when you don't have a service like that you can use, I would just say verify, verify, verify. Don't rely on anything that's electronic, right? Like you're saying, in person. Call. If it's not somebody that you're familiar with, make sure that you can independently verify who you're talking to get these wiring instructions, and be aware that the fraudsters are spoofing realtor emails, other attorney office emails. We had one where one attorney was handling seller side, one was handling buyer side. They sent the package over with wiring instructions, but somehow it got intercepted, and a fraudster sent fraudulent wiring instructions. And they thought, it's coming from an attorney's office. It's fine. We know this attorney, but it wasn't. It was off by just a little bit. And they sent the mortgage payment to some random wiring instruction.
That's terrifying.
I know. And then what happens in that case is that you've got attorneys that are basically trying to take out mortgages on their house to pay, potentially on a mortgage that didn't get properly paid in full. And so to me, just do not rely on email for any type of verification, and make your clients aware, make your realtors and agents that use you, make them aware that they need to be vigilant too, because it's not just what's coming into the attorney's office, it's what's going out to the clients as well.
Yeah. We have a kind of a rule in our office that we tell every agent that assume that you're going to get fraudulent wire instructions or some scam email during the transaction.
Yes.
Tell everybody involved, if you assume, then it makes you more vigilant to make sure what you're getting is legitimate.
Right.
Because the incidents of scamming, whether they actually get to the level of sending the fake wire instructions or not, is just on the rise. Like that, you might get something that's not immediately the hook of what they're trying to get you, but they're testing your willingness to engage.
Exactly.
Like you could be emailing with the fraudster, and they're just building up the comfort level, and then bam, they hit you with the wire instructions. But you think you've been talking to your agent, or you think you've been talking to the attorney.
Yep.
So your guard is completely down.
Yep. And I would say too, trust your gut. There have been some of our approved attorneys that got to the closing table, did the closing, recorded, and then something just felt off to them. And they dug a little deeper and realized that it was fraudulent. And so they saved themselves by trusting that gut feeling that something might be off there. And, in an office too, like with multiple people looking at the file, and in the file, multiple people emailing, there's just so many opportunities for somebody to intercept at that point in time. So I think you just have to be extra vigilant. And I know it's hard to do when you've got, 10 closings in one day going on, but just make sure that it's verified. And if something happens and you've sent it somewhere it shouldn't have went, immediately after you realize that, start calling. Call the FBI, call us, or the title insurer, call your insurance company.
Cyber.
Just immediately, right? And, as much as you can for offices to be able to afford all of the products that help, that's great. But not all offices can do that, right? So the ones, even the ones that do, you still have to be vigilant. I feel like it's just across the board vigilance, making sure you're aware of who's emailing you, who you're talking to on the phone.
I feel like those services, they're the icing on the cake. They don't replace the process.
Yes.
So
they can give you an extra feeling of, okay, we're okay. I've looked at everything. We've got this, but they're not just a replacement for you actually taking a look and making sure that you verified.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. And it's just thinking around the holidays, how devastating it would be for someone to wire something to the wrong place. So agents, tell your clients I have a never list. Attorneys will never change their wire instructions. And there's never a good reason not to call to verify before you send.
100% agree.
So please, 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 I know your buyers are scrambling to try to get stuff ready to move, and they're trying to transfer utilities. This is not the thing to skip.
No, it is definitely
I would
not.
rather them be late to the closing because they were extra vigilant verifying the wire instructions than be early or on time and have taken a risk and the money go elsewhere.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
We'll fit them in.
Yeah, right. I know. I mean, and things like that is just one fraudulent wire could shut down a whole practice, right?
Yeah.
I feel like you just have to be so careful because all it takes is one. And the fraudsters, they're trying it left and right, new schemes, new offices. So if they fail, it doesn't matter to them because they're just going to hit somebody else up.
Yeah.
But one mistake in an attorney's office could really be the difference between that practice staying open or not.
Yeah. I was sending a wire for a personal transaction at the beginning of the year. It was at Wells Fargo up here. And they said, oh, yeah, did you hear about the local attorney that the person, the fraudster came in person to verify the fraudulent wire instructions? So the attorney's office was like, well, we can't rely on these emailed wire instructions. Good.
Right.
But then the person said, okay, I'll come in. And they came in and they didn't get ID.
Oh, gosh. And see, I know there's fake IDs and stuff too. So I always say that agents, realtors, you guys are the first line of defense, right? You're the one communicating with these individuals. And it's gotten to the point now that where some of it, for the seller fraud, we're saying, look at the signature on the driver's license and compare it to the signature on the documents in the chain of title. Like it's gotten to that point that you really just have to be that vigilant.
Oh, yeah. The vacant land, we will not close mail away vacant land without either we have to secure the notary ourselves or we have to independently do a Zoom call.
Yes,
we
absolutely.
will not close. And that's not something that we've always done. So agents can get a little frustrated with us when we say we cannot get in contact with the seller and we can't until we verify their identity. We're not recording anything.
Exactly.
So we got people mad with us, but another local attorney told me in September that she had one where they were getting a bad feeling and they got to the end of it and they said, we got to get on a Zoom call. And that person disappeared, never to be heard from again. They forwarded
if they don't want to hop on a Zoom call, FaceTime, whatever you want to do, there's probably something wrong with that transaction.
And it starts before you ever get to the closing table.
Absolutely.
So it's everybody's responsibility to verify.
And we have insured a couple that were complete failures of title. It was a fraudster the whole time. And at that
when
point
you told
in time,
me that, I remember you saying that a couple months ago. And I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe how prevalent. We talked to, they were at another title company and they had 5 this year.
Oh man.
Of claims. Now I didn't get to the point to find out if they ended up insuring because I know at this point, everybody's been put on notice. Like at a certain point, like they're not going to be insured anymore.
Right. I know. I think one of our first ones, it was one of those that was very hard to tell, right? I think there was a fake ID, a fake notary, all of the stuff. And it was early on to where people had not gotten, a checklist of things to be on alert for and stuff. But that's a complete failure of title. And the only way to make the buyer, the insured whole, is to pay them back what they paid in the purchase price. And so
because we can't get the property. You can't force a seller you were never under contract with to sell.
It would be great if they would want to sell. But at that point, does the buyer even have any money left, right? They've already dispersed everything. Definitely be vigilant, be aware. I know that it's not ideal to have to deal with these things on every transaction or all transactions, and it's time consuming, but you got to do it. You just got to do it.
Well, I have a bonus question that I did not warn you about, but I think it'll be an easy one. Since it's mostly agents that listen to this, I like to hear from people that have been in private practice, like the agents that you most enjoyed working with. What were they like? What were like their common characteristics? Because if there's somebody listening that wants to know, like, okay, how do I make the closing smoother and make it a good closing for my clients? A closing attorney is going to have a pretty good idea of how you can do that.
Right?
So if you had any favorites, tell me what they were like.
I would say my favorites were the ones that were communicative, right? They were constantly in touch, not in a way of like, when is this going to close? What's going on? But just updating me throughout the process of things going on, right? If they knew that the buyer was going to be going out of town or the seller was going to be going out of town, that's helpful for me to know. So
or by the way, the buyer's getting married this weekend.
Yes. Yes. So the ones that are you're familiar with, that are happy to pick up the phone and give you a call and give you a heads up on something. The ones that when you tell them there is a problem, instead of getting just frazzled, they're just like, okay, what do we do to fix it? Right? Like, let's just work together and get it fixed. Because I know some things seem like maybe they're not a big deal and why can't we just get it insured over? But even if the title company is willing to insure over it,
still
some things, as the attorneys there, are thinking, this isn't something we want to get insured over. The buyer's not going to want to have to deal with this again or have to bring in a title company to defend it.
And also the contract does say marketable and insurable.
Right.
So a buyer that's willing to take something that is really just insurable, like that's discretion.
Exactly. You know? And so I think the agents that are there that are like, okay, yeah, it's a problem. What can we do to fix it? I'm here to help, assist in whatever way that I can, especially when they can provide you information. Sometimes all you need is additional information, right? And I know that sellers...
like the ones that actually tell us their client's email address?
Right, right.
That's nice.
And the seller information sheet, man, I love it when I get a good seller information sheet that's completely filled out way ahead of time. That's just fantastic. And some of my favorite agents were ones that were on the spot with that. You know, if they're representing the seller, they get that and they get it back to you really quickly. And maybe on the seller information sheet, your seller marked that they've had a judgment or a bankruptcy, and you would not maybe have noticed that until you got into the title work, and then you're dealing with it after the fact. And so to me, I just love communication. When I was in private practice, I loved feeling like I was in the loop. And if I felt like I was in the loop, I was more apt to keep them in the loop as well. So it was just good communication back and forth. And then getting the information that we need in a timely fashion, because we only have what's on the contract when you start the closing process. Without the buyer information or the seller information sheet, you really have no knowledge. And in Iredale, I practiced in Charlotte, there could be 20 people with the same name, right? And so when you're doing your search and you see all these things and no middle names or middle initials, you're freaking out. And all you need is some information, right? Like, let's get a little information ahead of time.
The amendments. You decided to give a seller credit. It would be nice to know before we got to the table, especially when there's a lender involved, because the lender might say, oh, we can't approve that.
Exactly. So a heads up on some of that stuff that maybe doesn't seem super important or doesn't seem like it's going to derail anything. It could impact the closing in a way that they don't anticipate. And so I think for me, those are the big things.
I like to tell agents that if you weren't the one that told us, or you don't see on the email string that we're copied, assume we don't know.
Right.
I would rather be told the same piece of information 4 times than 0 times. So
me too.
We're not going to, nobody loves getting a ton of emails or a ton of phone calls, but when it means we have information versus not, call us, email us. Come on.
And I know sometimes the clients, particularly sellers in my experience, it's such an inconvenience for them to give the information needed, right? But I'm like, if you want to
get paid,
do you want to get to the closing table? We've got to have it. And so I think
nobody made you put this house on the market most of the time.
Right. But it can really make a difference in terms of efficiency too, right? It's just knowing things up front so you can go ahead and address them. And I feel like sometimes everybody's lost in what they're doing, and maybe they remember like 2 weeks later, and that 2 weeks, maybe we're going to be delayed 2 weeks now. So even if you think it may not be important, the marriage thing is a big one. That's happened so many times that they're engaged and they got married in the process and nobody told us. And you get to the closing table and you see a wedding ring and you're like, what?
Ooh. Or like someone has just changed their last name and they didn't tell anybody. The lender doesn't know, we don't know. And
when there's a junior and a senior, have you had that happen?
Oh, yeah.
On the contract, it's just got the one name and you're thinking it's senior, but senior passed away. Like it's just we had that happen a couple of times. And you think, how does that even happen? But it does. Like, I just feel like it happened to us multiple occasions. So I'm like, is it a senior or a junior? No, let's get this figured out. And then on the contract, when you've got the record owner, a big one of mine is, let's try to figure out who the actual record owner is, right? Like, if the person's now deceased, at least tell me a state of, so that I can be on alert to know. And that's one we had where it just had the name and there was a son and dad with the same name and it didn't say estate.
Which one? Yeah.
And the estate was out of state. There wasn't anything in North Carolina. We had no idea what was going on. And we thought everything was fine because it's the same name. We're communicating with so-and-so. And you get toward the end and you're like, man, this is not adding up. And turns out the whole time we were dealing with junior and we thought we were dealing with senior.
Oh my gosh. I think about on the buyer side of that, how, sometimes the agent will say, how do you want your name to appear on the deed? Okay. And they give that name, but then they've given their lender their full name on the title request. So the loan documents are going to have the full name. And then by the time we get the title request, the contract's not in the same name. And sometimes lenders want that amended. Sometimes they don't care. But a tip for agents is if they've already done the loan application, ask them what name they gave the lender.
Yes, just put it on there exactly the same.
Yeah, it'll save you a potential amendment later for something kind of silly.
Yes, and it can be. And then if you don't correct it, then you're going to correct it after closing probably. They're going to be like, okay, can we get a corrective deed now?
Yeah.
Or a corrective affidavit or whatever the case
we're doing
may
it
be.
right there at the table. And it's like, yeah, at least we got it done before it's recorded. But we'd much rather just not have to change anything.
Yes, closing table changes and surprises are never fun for anybody.
No, they're not. That's the time where we just want it smooth sailing. We want to celebrate, do some high fives, some fist bumps, and let you go. I had a cute, I say cute, she's my same age, but she was very like excited first time home buyer. And her family her parents had been saving a bottle of Camus Special Select that they'd had since 2010 to crack open. I'm like, I was like, what's your address? I think I'll come join you guys.
I love those closings.
That's what we want.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't want to have to change anything at the table. Well, I'm not going to keep you here forever because I know that you've got a busy day ahead, but I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You mentioned that you had never been on a podcast before. I cannot tell.
It's my first one, and I was so nervous because I see you do it all the time, and I'm like, man, she is so relaxed.
You are too. You are too. You're not giving yourself enough credit.
Oh my goodness.
I definitely would love to have you back.
You made it so easy, though. I just feel much better about it. So it's been a wonderful experience, and we appreciate you guys so much. We appreciate attorneys that want to do it the right way and ask the questions. So that's another thing.
So agents don't get mad at us. We want to do it the right way.
Yes. Always ask the question. It would be better to ask the question and maybe get an answer that you don't like than after the fact have to deal with it because you decided to do it one way and really we probably should have done it the other.
Almost everything is fixable, but some things aren't. So once we get it recorded, there are some things that like you just can't unwind. So I'd rather, I don't like anybody's closing to be delayed, but if it means they can be good and protected, that's what we're going to do.
And I would say, when you're an approved attorney with a title company, that means that we trust what you're doing, right? We're relying on you to let us know when there's a problem so that we can advise on it. So I do think it's like a whole group effort, right? Yeah. Everybody's working together and the title company may be the third party in the background that nobody else can see, but we're there and you're dealing with us on a daily basis and we're trying to help you get things closed. So we really appreciate attorneys like you that make it easier for us, right?
Well, we'll try. And I'm serious. If we're ever making it difficult, please let me know. We'll get whipped into shape quick.
The attorneys that we hear from all the time, we're like, okay, great. We're hearing from them. We know what's going on. We would rather you guys. And I know Mark Guerin always says it's job security, right? If you guys aren't calling and ask us questions, why do they need 7 of us?
Well, I also think it's kind of a dangerous trap to get in as a closing attorney to think you know the answer to everything. Just because, as you mentioned earlier, things change so often. We've got cases coming down about restrictions and I won't get into that because that's a whole other can of worms.
Case by case. That's what I'll say on those. Case by case right now.
And then we've got just Monday, the whole Kaiser Island debacle. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review that. And, it's the landscape changes constantly. And if we are lucky enough to be in the closing room all day, which is what we want because that's business, that means those hours are not dedicated to being able to keep up on the every minute development.
Exactly.
And you guys, in the nature of what you do, tend to do that more.
Right. We try to be there as a resource to say, okay, this is what's changing now. Even though this is technically still legally correct, let's do it this way. It's going to make it better, more efficient, and could potentially be good if something changes legislative-wise, right? And so we're here to help, trying to get things closed. Attorneys like Tiffany are fantastic to work with. So
that's
I
kind
think
of you.
I'm so happy.
Fantastic to work with.
So happy when I get questions from you guys because they're direct questions. You give me all the facts that I need, right? And we can give you an answer that helps you get to the closing table.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. For everybody listening, again, Christy Moretz-Eichert, Investors Title. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode.